Hi everyone, my name is Jan Wegener and I've just returned from a crazy road trip photographing more than 70 days straight for 5 or 6 hours every day and taking more than 500,000 photos and videos along the way. During this time, I've been reminded of a few important and sometimes painful lessons I've learned over the years that I know if you will keep them in mind next time you're out in the field will increase your success rate dramatically. And I will also show you how this little device that we all have in our pockets can help you to create some truly unique photos. I've made one of my biggest mistakes as a photographer many years ago, in 2007 to be precise. But it haunts me to this day and I do everything I can in the field to avoid making that same mistake again. As bird photographers in particular, we're often tempted to quite quickly move on from one subject to the next. We see a great bird, rip out our big lens, snap a couple tight portraits and then tell ourselves, nailed it, I got the shot, let's move on. All too often we simply get a shot instead of the shot and miss out on a truly unique image that's waiting for us right around the corner. I fell into that trap early in my photography journey when I was on a trip to northern Norway. There were stunning birds all around us in the most beautiful habitat. But I just simply had tunnel vision. I had my big 600mm prime lens in both teleconverters and all I focused on was getting as many species as possible and just getting tight portraits of all the birds. Believe it or not, a few weeks ago in far north Queensland, I almost made the same mistake again. One of the most spectacular birds you can find up there is the golden bowerbird, which builds these incredible boughs, which are essentially huge stacks of small branches that are decorated with lichens and flowers. Now, of course, the golden bowerbird itself is already quite stunning and warrants some tight portraits, but the bower itself is a big part of what makes this bird special and tells a unique story. The first time I had an opportunity to photograph golden bowerbirds, I sat at the bower with my friend Glenn. We got some nice clean images with our 600mm prime lenses, but at the same time I felt like they were lacking context because you couldn't really see what truly makes this bird special. A few weeks later on my way home, I had another opportunity to spend some time on a different golden bowerbird bower. The male bowerbird there was a lot more accommodating and was sitting in different trees and going to the bower decorating it, and so I was able to quite quickly get some nice photos and videos. So a few hours go by, I'm happily shooting away, when it suddenly hits me and I'm realizing I'm taking tight portraits again when there's actually an amazing opportunity right in front of me. Now I'm kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because it's a bit of a walk back to the car where my other camera is and I didn't want to carry my big 600mm prime lens and the tripod. So I hide them away in the rainforest, hike back to the car, get my second R5 Mark II body, the 100 to 500mm lens and a smaller tripod and head back to the bower. I had been so busy filming and photographing the bowerbird that I totally ignored the fact that the bower it built, which was quite a structure, was actually in quite a photogenic spot and that I should be able to get a nice wider angle shot of the bird and the bower. So I grabbed my 100 to 500mm lens and a smaller tripod and set up my second camera body much closer to the bower, trying to frame it in a way that I would get the bird large enough in the frame that it still is impactful, but at the same time also show the whole bower. And sometimes with these kinds of shots, it's actually difficult because if it's too wide, then the bird will get lost, or if it's too tight, then you don't really get the feel of the whole habitat. Whereas here I felt the balance was just right. And because the camera was much closer to the bower now, I decided to use it remotely so I wouldn't disturb the bird at all. And then the big waiting and hoping game began because I only had a few more hours to spend at that spot, and because the bird had been around for a while and decorated the bower already, I wasn't sure if it would actually go back down to the bower. But after about an hour of waiting, it finally came back to the bower and I was able to get an image that actually showed the bird with some lichen in the beak and also the whole bower, giving me that context that I have been wanting the whole time, the beautiful structure that the bird built with the bird. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that one style of photo is better than the other, but the lesson I've learned in the field over the years is that if you're presented with a unique opportunity, you should try to take full advantage of it. Take headshots of the bird, flight shots if possible, tight portraits, wider shots. There's basically no limit to what you can take, and that will sometimes allow you to create quite a unique portfolio of images in a relatively short period of time rather than only getting the one type of shot. And I would actually also include taking some video if the opportunity presents itself to you in the field, because photos can tell a certain part of the story, but sometimes only videos can complete the whole story, because you can get the bird calling, for instance, or you can show what the bird is actually doing. And when it comes to filming, shooting a large variety of different angles becomes even more important. Because if I just film the bird on the perch or the bower, it gets boring quite quickly. But if I start to merge different angles and shots, I can suddenly tell a beautiful story of what a bird is doing with just a few clips. Over the years, I've learned that one aspect of photography that's totally neglected is editing. Most people see it as a necessary evil rather than something that they can use to enhance their photography. On this bowerbird image, for instance, the light was a bit flat and I exposed it quite bright to get the maximum detail and the least amount of noise. But then in the editing process, I made sure to add some mask and curve to make the image a bit more moody and give it that dark rainforest feel. And these and many other techniques are exactly what I teach you step by step in my brand new Photoshop and Lightroom masterclasses. Once you've learned how to get the best results out of your RAW files, it will transform editing from a frustrating chore into a rewarding experience that you will actually look forward to and enjoy. We will start the classes by learning all the tools and techniques needed to transform our RAW files, and then apply our newly learned knowledge when we do a few full edits. And I'm also giving you the RAW files I'm working on in the class so you can edit right alongside me. I've divided up the masterclasses into easy to follow chapters so you can learn at your own pace. And it's also quite easy to jump back to a certain point in time to refresh your mind when it comes to how to use a certain tool, for instance. I know these two masterclasses will help your editing journey tremendously, but don't just take my word for it. The feedback from the current students has already been phenomenal, and it's great to see that I've been able to share my knowledge with you and help you to get the images of your dreams. So if you want to become skillful and confident when it comes to image editing and actually enjoy the process, make sure to check out my two brand new masterclasses down there in the description. I said earlier that I had to shoot remotely to get some of these wider angle shots of certain birds like the golden bowerbird or other birds in the past. And now you might think that is really complicated, but in fact it's actually quite easy, because all of you have one of these in your pockets, your smartphone, and all the big brands have apps that let you control your camera directly through the smartphone. In this case, for instance, I have Canon's Camera Connect app open, connected to my R3. So now I can just go in here and, for instance, stop down to f22, and now we have a very dark image. And now I can go back to f4 wide open and get a nice and bright video again. So controlling your camera with the smartphone is actually super easy, and I can, for instance, switch from photo to video or change all the settings. Now all these big brands have different names for these apps. I think on Nikon it's called SnapBridge, on Sony it's called Image Edge Mobile, and on Canon it's called Camera Connect. In the past, sometimes it was a little bit iffy to connect your camera to the smartphone and the connection wasn't the most stable, but with the latest camera, these connections are actually really good and you can get some fantastic results. So all you have to do to make it work is download the app onto your phone, then follow the instructions in the app on how to connect your camera, and then simply when you turn on the camera next time, you can connect it to your phone, and within a few seconds you will have it available in your app, and then you can go to remote live view shooting, and then you can fully control your camera remotely. You can change from photo to video and change all the settings. And this has definitely enabled me to create some unique images in the field, and it also really helps me if I film myself or photograph myself in the field, because I can take my phone, position myself perfectly in the frame, focus on myself with my finger on the touchscreen as well, and then get the perfect composition every time. So if you haven't tried it yet, it's definitely something I would recommend trying. The only downside with it is that it chews through batteries very quickly on your smartphone and also on your camera. With the Bowerbird, I had 4 batteries with me and I was there for about an hour and a half, and I had to use all 4 batteries, and my phone was flat after that as well. So I got the shot in the end, but I also basically ran out of all my batteries. The second big takeaway from my road trip is that you don't have to be ashamed if you have a happy trigger finger. I definitely always like to take a lot of photos, and now with 30 frames per second and pre-capture available, I'm definitely taking even more photos, several 100,000 over the last few months to be precise, but I think ultimately it's worth it. Holding back in the field ultimately has only one result: many missed moments. And sometimes there are moments you don't even realize they're happening right in front of you until you actually look through the images you've taken. Now, sometimes we can anticipate action, but other times it happens so fast that only a high frame rate and maybe pre-capture can get you that unique moment. During my road trip, I had the chance to photograph some stunning red-winged parrots coming to my friend's backyard. The first day I spent simply photographing the birds on nice perches and I got some beautiful portraits. But there was this little voice creeping into my head saying, "Jan, wouldn't it be amazing to take a red-winged parrot in flight with a fan tail fully banking, showing all the beautiful red in the wing?" And because I couldn't get rid of that little voice in my head anymore, I returned to my friend's backyard 2 more times, and this time around I exclusively focused on trying to get the birds either landing or taking off. So I set my R5 Mark II to 30 frames per second and pre-capture activated, and whenever a bird would come in or take off, I simply fired away. Now with the R5 Mark II, it's not as easy as with the Sony A9 Mark III where you have 120 frames per second available. That was truly amazing for flight shots. But after going through a few thousand images, I was eventually able to capture a truly stunning image of a red-winged parrot in flight where you can appreciate all the amazing colors that bird has to offer. Of course, the happy trigger finger also means extra hours to spend on the computer to sort through all the images. But if the return are truly special images, I think it's a worthwhile investment. Would you agree? In the past, one could argue that shooting a lot of extra images would eventually wear out the shutter on your camera or cost you extra money. But with mirrorless cameras and the electronic shutters in particular, shooting a lot of extra images basically doesn't cost you anything except for extra time investment. But I think if the return are some truly unique images, that time is well spent. Hand in hand with my advice to not hold back in the field goes my next lesson that I've learned on the trip and over the years, and that is to make sure to have enough shutter speed at all cost. During my photography career, I've taken insane amounts of blurry images simply because I didn't have high enough shutter speeds. Now, of course, it's not always easy to have high enough shutter speeds, especially if you're shooting in a dark rainforest environment, but ultimately the formula is quite simple. The higher your shutter speed, the higher your success rate and the higher the amount of nice and sharp images that you're getting. Now, sometimes that means that you have to shoot at uncomfortably high ISOs of like 12,800 or higher, for instance. But with programs available like DxO PureRAW, we can actually clean up the noise in these files fairly easily and still get some very good results. And I always say, a blurry image is much worse than a noisy image because we can fix a noisy image but cannot fix a blurry image. And if you want to try out DxO PureRAW and get a special deal, make sure to check out the discount code I've linked for you in the description. I was quickly reminded of the need for high enough shutter speeds on my recent road trip when we're doing a few different boat trips. And on these boat trips, you're often confronted with low light situations and a moving boat because they're just drifting in the current. Because the R5 Mark II sometimes struggles at the high ISOs, I was tempted to stay to ISO like 3200 or 6400. But I quickly regretted that when looking through my files one of the evenings because a lot of the images I took on the boat were slightly blurry because I was using shutter speeds of like a 3/20th of a second to like a 400th of a second. But hand holding that from a shaky boat and a moving boat was still not enough to get me a lot of sharp images. So I definitely should have bumped up that ISO and shot wide open to make sure that I have enough shutter speed to not get so many blurry images. When it comes to the shutter speed, I have two simple rules. If I'm shooting perch birds from a tripod, I want to have at least a 400th of a second. And if I'm photographing birds in flight, I want to have a 4,000th of a second as my minimum. And if I'm hand holding, maybe even from a boat and photographing perch birds, I want to have at least an 800th of a second as my shutter speed. Now, in certain situations, that's definitely not easy to achieve, but ultimately I think it's worth it because you will have a lot less blurry images. Of course, we will always be confronted with the temptation to lower the ISO to have less noise in the field and use a slower shutter speed, but in my opinion, that's usually not worth it because the odds of missing a moment are usually much greater than the difficulty in removing that little bit of extra noise. And lastly, the one lesson I had to learn the hard way on this road trip is that sometimes you just have to grind it out and have to try again, and you eventually will get the shot. While I was getting some great images throughout the road trip, there was also days where simply not much was happening, or there were certain birds that simply didn't quite do what we wanted them to do. For instance, the magnificent riflebird up on the Cape York Peninsula. We found a beautiful branch where we quickly realized that it was its display perch, but for 3 or 4 days it simply wouldn't display. We knew we had the right bird in the right spot at the right time, but it was simply not doing what we wanted it to do. So we kept going back to it and going back to it and going back to it. And on the 5th day, we finally got the amazing wing display and got some beautiful photos and videos. So sometimes you just have to put in the hard yards and grind it out to get some truly unique images. There are many more moments, stories, and lessons to be shared with you guys, so stay tuned for my next video. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, let me know all your thoughts in the comments, check out my channel membership and hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys in another video. Bye!